one thing about this, Megan, is the president, to the extent that he's sympathetic to marijuana use and would like to see it perhaps legalized or at least decriminalized, same for Eric Holder, are not holding a particularly controversial position among a great many Americans. After all, remember, Megan, you don't swallow this as a pill or sip it in a drink. You smoke this.
It's true. Fox News is fighting an increasingly lonely rearguard action against rising public opinion. Maybe you haven't noticed if you don't watch that channel. This is a country in which the majority of public opinion has moved towards embracing the legalization of marijuana, in which 2 states have already done it, a country in which half of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents under 45 say marijuana should be legalized, and even one with a long conservative tradition embracing marijuana legalization. William F. Buckley, a man known as the father of modern American conservatism, wrote a column after column arguing that drug prohibition actually causes more problems than it prevents. But still today, it is left to Fox News to stand athwart history yelling stop at a time when no one is inclined to do so. Yesterday, the Journal of Neuroscience released a study online that linked casual marijuana use to brain abnormalities in young people between 18 and 25. It was big news on Fox last night, and I will admit I'm skeptical that it was because of their deep concern for the brains of young marijuana smokers in this country. Because if that were the case, they might have noted that other substances, such as alcohol, are also known to damage the brain as well. I'm guessing they were more concerned about the brains of a certain constituency in their audience that is particularly agitated by the growing acceptance of marijuana, a group of people who see the legalization of pot as yet another part of the seismic change that has come in Obama's America, along with a rising demographic that will eventually create a white minority. It's precisely for that reason the politics of marijuana are way more tenuous and complicated than you might think if you just looked at the poll numbers. That's the reason that Attorney General Eric Holder has been walking a tightrope between these two worlds ever since Colorado and Washington voted to legalize marijuana. He said on Friday that he was, quote, cautiously optimistic about how things are going so far in those 2 states. But until major changes come to the other 48 states or the federal government changes the classification of marijuana, then we'll keep getting stories like this.
I went to court here in New York City where they announced this, and I asked, what's the dumbest drug case you had today? And they told me about a guy who got 47 days in Rikers just for having a joint in his pocket.
Joining me now, Tony Dokoupil. He's senior writer for NBCNews.com, author of a great new book, The Last Pirate, A Father, His Son, and the Golden Age of Marijuana, which tells an incredible story you should check out. All right, Tony. I think the politics of this are fascinating, and I'm fascinated by the fact that Fox News seems to have kind of taken up the cause of being the ones to beat the drum on this issue, when a lot of the other parts of the conservative infrastructure don't seem particularly interested in fighting it.
They're not interested to the extent that they don't want to comment on it, but there is room for people to comment. So the science of what marijuana does to the brain is, believe it or not, unsettled, in part because the government won't provide access to researchers to do clear studies. So there's a vacuum. Fox can step in.
Wait, the governor, explain that. The government doesn't let people do studies on it?
So there's one producer of marijuana in America. It's the University of Mississippi. And if you want to get a marijuana, which is illegal federally, if you want to get it to study it and then give it to people and see how it affects their brains, you have to get it approved and then provided by that university. And the government doesn't readily provide those approvals. Hard to study.
So there's a dearth of actual research, even as we enter this period in which we're running this big social experiment.
I mean, in a sense, there is an epic amount of research. There's like thousands of years of research in just a natural study. But like, but like in terms of like published papers, no, there's not a whole lot for this very particular reason. And so that creates a vacuum, and then Fox News can step in and cite this one particular study and make huge hay out of it because there's not 10 studies that refute it.
That's very interesting. I think Eric Holder has negotiated the politics of this in a very interesting way. And it seems to me, if you were to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being burn it all down, raid everyone, send in the DEA to these states, shut it all down, and 10 being complete and total acceptance and embrace, where would you put Holder on that scale and how he's negotiated the deal?
Well, he's a perfect 5.
Right, exactly. That's it. I'm glad you said that because that was my instinct.
He's a perfect 5 because he says he's optimistic cautiously, and then if you read down in the quote, he says he's still watching all of the different indicators. You know, are kids using it? Are Mexican mobsters using? Are coming in and making money off of it? Is it making the roads less safe? And you know, we are not as close to legalization as one might think. If a kid in a crosswalk gets hit by somebody who's found to be smoking marijuana, Republican politicians who are on the sidelines now, believe it or not, they're going to step in a huge way.
That brings up the thing that I've been following on this is politics abhors a vacuum. And it does seem to me as something as kind of culturally resonant as this issue. There is a bizarre vacuum around the people saying, don't do this, don't do this. I mean, we're highlighting Fox because they've been doing some of it. Bill O'Reilly's been doing some of it. But they seem kind of alone, and I've not seen politicians really stepping out.
And the politicians who have stepped out are actually Democratic politicians, which is interesting. Like Jerry Brown in California has said, you know, the world is competitive. I don't know if we want a bunch of stoned people.
Was he the one who said China wasn't? Someone else was talking about how China doesn't smoke pot.
You know, I'm unclear on that. I do know that actually Colombia, which I read about in the book, Colombia doesn't smoke pot. So Colombia was a big marijuana producer, and they used to refer to the Americans who came down to get it as donkeys. Anyway, America's doing fine relative to Colombia, so clearly pot, which we consume in epic proportions, is not doing us all that much harm. But you know, you are seeing the beginnings of a message from the Republican side that lumps all drugs together. The heroin epidemic, which I think is widely recognized and a huge problem, public health concern, is a problem for the legalizers because when you start talking about drug abuse, it's still possible to lump everything together. I mean, marijuana is still an illegal drug.
It is amazing to me, though, how much the politics of law and order, crime, and drugs, in some ways, how much public opinion and discourse around it have changed, and how slow policy has been into change. So the public opinion seems like it's moved 100 miles, and the laws have moved 3 miles.
Right, because there's a huge potential downside to being in favor of legalization, and not a huge potential downside to just sort of towing the line.
The status quo. And the point you made, the very like Aaron Sorkin West Wing episode point you just made about someone tragically hit in a crosswalk by someone who's stoned, the kind of perfect touchstone incident is a really, really good point. And that's, of course, what everyone fears. That's the risk aversion you're seeing in politics.
Could happen.
Tony DeCopel, the book is The Last Pirate. Go check it out.